Most people who have heard the parable of the talents walk away thinking it is a story about a lazy servant who did not try hard enough, and I completely understand why. The master calls him wicked and lazy. The talent gets taken away. He gets thrown into the outer darkness. It looks like a punishment for not working hard. But here is what stopped me cold when I read this parable slowly. The servant himself tells us exactly why he buried the talent, and the reason he gives has nothing to do with laziness. He says, "I was afraid." 2 words, right in the middle of the parable. And I think those 2 words change everything about how we are supposed to understand this story, because the servant was not too lazy to act, he was too afraid to act. And those are completely different problems, with completely different roots and completely different remedies. I believe the fear sitting inside this servant is the same fear that is sitting inside a lot of us right now, quietly keeping something buried that was never meant to stay in the ground. In Matthew chapter 25, Jesus tells about a master who is going on a long journey. Before he leaves, he calls 3 servants and gives each of them a sum of money, called talents, to manage while he is away. He gives 5 talents to the first servant, 2 to the second and 1 to the third. And the text says he gives to each one according to his own ability. The master returns. The first 2 servants have doubled what they were given. The master's response to both of them is identical, and it is one of the most beautiful things in all of Scripture. "Well done, good and faithful servant. You have been faithful with a few things, I will put you in charge of many things. Come and share your master's happiness." Matthew 25:21-23. Then the third servant steps forward. He gives back exactly what he was given, not a coin more, and he explains himself. "Master, I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, and gathering where you have not scattered seed. So I was afraid and went out and hid your talent in the ground. See, here is what belongs to you." Matthew 25:24-25. I want to spend real time here because I think the servant's explanation is one of the most psychologically honest moments in all of Jesus' teaching. He does not say, "I forgot." He does not say, "I was busy." He does not say, "I tried and failed." He says, "I knew and I was afraid, and so I hid it." This is not a portrait of a careless person. This is a portrait of someone who thought about his situation very carefully and then made a deliberate decision based entirely on fear of what would happen if things went wrong. He knew the master was exacting. He knew the stakes were real. He knew that failure had consequences, and all of that knowing produced one outcome: paralysis. He reasoned his way into inaction. He used his understanding of the master's character, not as a reason to work hard, but as a justification for doing nothing at all. Fear dressed up as wisdom, that is what buried the talent, and that disguise is what makes this kind of fear so hard to catch in ourselves. The servant did not bury the talent because he did not care. He buried it because he cared so much about not losing it that he never gave it a chance to grow. Fear of loss kept him from any possibility of gain. There is something else in the servant's words that I think deserves its own moment, and it is the picture he had of his master. He says, "I knew that you are a hard man, harvesting where you have not sown, gathering where you have not scattered seed." But look at what the master actually did at the beginning of the story. He trusted each servant with real resources and gave them complete freedom to work with those resources while he was gone. He did not micromanage them. He did not give them a detailed plan. He gave them what he had and he trusted them with it. That is not the picture of a hard, demanding, impossible-to-please tyrant. That is the picture of someone who genuinely trusted the people he gave authority to. But the third servant had built a distorted image of the master in his mind, an image based on worst-case thinking, an image that made the master seem impossible to satisfy, which made any attempt at success feel pointless in advance. And I think this matters enormously for how we understand the fear the servant was carrying. His fear was not just fear of failure, it was fear built on a false belief about who the master was. He was responding to a version of the master that existed mostly inside his own imagination. When we are afraid to use what God has given us, I wonder sometimes how much of that fear is built on a distorted picture of who God actually is. A picture of a God who is impossible to please, who is watching for mistakes, who will take everything away the moment we do something wrong. And I wonder whether that picture, rather than the actual character of God, is what is keeping some things buried in our lives. The master's response to the third servant is one that many people find harsh when they first read it. He calls him wicked and lazy. He takes the talent away. He has him thrown out, and I do not want to soften that. There is real weight in the master's judgment here, but I think understanding what he is actually responding to changes how we hear it. The master is not angry because the servant failed. The other two servants could have failed. Trading is risky. They could have lost everything and come back with nothing. But the master's response to honest effort and honest failure would have been very different from his response to fear-driven inaction. What the master is responding to is the choice to bury a living thing in the ground and return it unchanged, the refusal to put it to use at all. The choosing of preservation over participation, and even the smallest action would have been better than burial. The master says this himself. Well then, you should have put my money on deposit with the bankers, so that when I returned I would have received it back with interest. You should have at least put it in the bank. You should have at least done the smallest possible thing, something, anything. Because even the smallest step of faith produces more than complete stillness ever will. The master's judgment is not against risk or failure. It is against the decision to let fear make the final call. It is against handing the controls of your life to anxiety and calling it caution. I want to think about what a talent actually represents for a moment, because I think this is where the parable reaches past the ancient world and lands right in the middle of our real lives today. A talent in Jesus' time was not a small thing. 1 talent represented roughly 20 years of wages for a laborer. This was a serious, substantial, real resource that the master placed in the servant's hands. And over time the word talent shifted in English to mean something else, a natural gift or ability. And while that is not exactly what the Greek word meant, I think the overlap is worth noticing, because the parable works just as powerfully if you read it through that lens. What if the buried talent is the ability you have never used, because you were afraid no one would value it? What if it is the calling you have been sitting on because you are afraid of what happens if you try and fail? What if it is the conversation you have not had, the project you have not started, the step of faith you have not taken, all of it sitting in the ground, carefully preserved, unchanged, because fear convinced you that keeping it safe was the same as being responsible with it? The servant gave back exactly what he was given, but the master did not give it to him to give back unchanged. He gave it to him to put to work. And there is a deep difference between preserving something and actually using it for what it was meant for. Here is the thing about the kind of fear this servant had that I find genuinely important to name out loud. His fear did not feel wrong to him. It felt responsible. It felt careful. It felt like the right way to handle something precious and irreplaceable that belonged to someone else. He was not cavalier about the talent. He was deeply careful about it. He thought about it seriously. He was concerned about losing it. All of those things sound like virtues, and in a different context, they would be. But when concern about loss becomes the reason for doing nothing, when the fear of getting it wrong becomes more powerful than the desire to do something, what looks like faithfulness from the outside is actually a kind of abdication on the inside. The servant was not faithful, he was afraid, and the fear dressed itself up as faithfulness so convincingly that he probably did not even see the difference. Fear that calls itself faithfulness is one of the most effective disguises the enemy uses against the things God placed in our hands. It feels holy from the inside, it looks responsible from the outside, and it keeps things buried that were never meant to stay in the ground. The parable of the talents is not primarily a story about laziness. The servant who buried his talent was not lazy. He was afraid, and his own words tell us so. I was afraid, and I went and hid it. He was afraid because he had built a distorted picture of the master, a picture of someone impossible to please, and that picture made any attempt feel pointless before it began. So he chose the option that felt safest. He preserved what he had, he returned it unchanged, and he called it faithfulness. But the master called it something different, because faithfulness is not about keeping something safe. Faithfulness is about putting what you have been given to work, trusting the one who gave it enough to actually use it in the way it was meant to be used. The talent in the ground grew nothing. It multiplied nothing, it produced nothing, and all the careful preservation in the world could not change that, because something buried is not the same as something entrusted. So here is the question this parable leaves me with, and I hope it leaves you with it too. What is sitting in the ground right now? What has been placed in your hands that fear has been keeping buried? The master in this story is not asking for a guaranteed return. He is asking for an honest attempt. He is asking you to take what he put in your hands and trust him enough to do something with it, even if the outcome is uncertain, even if the risk is real, because the invitation on the other side of that attempt, come and share your master's happiness, is one that fear will never let you hear from the bottom of a hole. Thank you so much for watching this all the way through. Please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe if you have not already. I will see you in the next one.